Hello, everybody, and welcome to our first webinar of 2024. My name is Michael Kramer. I am the Calibration and Inspection Program Manager at Perry Johnson Laboratory Accreditation, and it is my pleasure to present to you all today on common findings. So something I've been doing the last couple of years, first webinar of the year, entails, well, before I get into today's webinar, for you first timers, this webinar is being recorded. You can go to under the resource tab at the PJLA website. You can go back and listen to the recording of this webinar or various other webinars. You can also request the slides. So if you want to go back and perhaps look at the slides, and you can more than welcome to use them for training purposes, by all means, please visit our website. Currently, hopefully everybody can hear me. You all are muted. There should be a question tab on your screen. Feel free, as we're going along, if you have any questions, type them in there, and at the conclusion of today's webinar, I'll go back and review them and hopefully answer them. So without further ado, we will continue. So this webinar, so during 2023, what we've done is compiled data from actual PJLA assessments, and this webinar is pertaining to the 17025 2017 program for both testing and calibration. And if we have any sampling folks in there, and what we've done is we identified a top 10 list, basically the sections in which assessors wrote non-conformances during PJLA's assessments. So I'm going to go through this list, counting backwards, starting at number 10, hit on some of the areas that I feel that may prompted writing a non-conformances. So we will start with the number 10 area, which is actually internal audits. An internal audit is a formal laboratory activity that's got to be performed according to a predetermined schedule. So a predetermined schedule can be conducted either a full laboratory audit annually, biannually, or could break down various sections. However, that predetermined schedule needs to be defined. So looking at the requirements. So internal audits, you may have heard me say this before. Folks, this has been on my past webinar. When you see the word shall, that is a requirement. You shall. Which any nonconformance that is written should center around a requirement and the shall word. So the very first requirement in section 8.8 internal audits, the laboratory shall conduct internal audits at planned intervals to provide information on whether the laboratory management conforms to the lab's own requirement for its management system, including the requirements for this document. And we're going to dissect these a little bit here. So first thing that may have prompted non-conformances is at that planned interval, simply just not doing the internal audit as specified in your predetermined schedule. So it should cover all activities over a reasonable period of time, and you have flexibility, just that predetermined schedule. Some organizations may elect to perform the entire internal audit at one time. Some may elect to break it down in bits and pieces, but excuse me, via different quarters. So the internal audit is, what are we looking for an internal audit? Looking for whether your quality management system is actually complying to, on a daily basis, to your own requirements of the management system. So in other words, you have an internal quality management system which specifies, ideally how you comply. So basically with this, when you're doing an internal audit, And even when an assessor is doing an assessment, it's a great tool to have your quality management system presented, which basically states how, which basically will give guidance on how your organization is complying with the standards. So have the words "do as I say as you do." So basically, if you utilize that word "shall" within your own internal quality management system, these are actual requirements that you are placing on yourselves as far as how you folks are complying with the standard. It says to provide, of course, to provide information on whether the system conforms to the requirements of this document. So this document being 17025, so the internal audit should, of course, take into account all the applicable clauses of the 17025 standard. And ideally should provide information on whether the management system is effectively implemented and maintained. So ideally, yes, internal audit, hopefully it's more than just a tool that an organization is performing in order to fulfill a requirement of the standard. Ideally, it would prompt some opportunities for improvement. So let me go back here before we get into the next area here. So the one thing with the internal audit, it has to support that the internal audit is looking at all the applicable requirements. Often I'll see perhaps a cross-reference checklist that has all the applicable requirements of the standards. So speaking on my behalf, yes, I have written nonconformances because the internal audit that was presented may not have provided evidence that all applicable requirements of the standard ISO IEC 17025 2017 were subjected to the audit. An audit checklist, we have under the resource tab a checklist that I have seen utilized by many organizations that cover all the clauses. Basically is a great tool for assuring that you are looking and auditing at all the required elements of the standard within your organization, and perhaps solidify it a little bit more. Other than that checklist, a final audit report, perhaps. And believe me, as an assessor, I love when organizations has findings on themselves. You know your organization's much better than the assessor. If there are any areas, gray areas, hopefully they would be identified and investigated during your own internal audit. Okay, looking at number 3. So when we do assessments, of course, we're looking for compliance to 17025. We're also looking for compliance to our policies, PL3. So we have PL documents. These are policy documents. PL3 is our policy on measurement uncertainty. These are not extra things that we are having organizations comply with as an ILAC signatory. And we are assessed to assure that we comply with 17011. And we are also assessed to assure that we are enforcing ILAC's P documents, policy documents. So PL3, for example, will cross-reference to an ILAC policy document. So requirements in our policies are also captured in ILAC policies. So we write assessments against nonconformances found against our policies. These are part of our assessment process. PL3 being uncertainty, which came in at number 9. So for you calibrators out there, probably a source of uncertainty of nonconformity may have to do with the uncertainty budget. So you must prepare an uncertainty budget whenever applicable and appropriate, containing all relevant information related to the identified significant sources of uncertainty. So it is required prior to being accredited that you have prepared these uncertainty budgets. These are reviewed during the assessment, and they need to be maintained. You'll see here they're not a one-time thing here. It's not one thing you do to get accredited and sort of put it up on the shelf and leave it. Another area which may have prompted nonconformance is recording of uncertainties. So on your scope of accreditation, we look at CMC, calibration and measurement capabilities to assure, and this is an ILAC requirement again, no more than 2 significant digits. So this also is applicable to reporting results. So for example, if we see an uncertainty of let's say point for a length measurement 0.03 millimeters, that is properly stated within 2 significant digits. For a nonconformist, we may be seeing something like 0.024578. Anything beyond that two places would be considered insignificant. And if you think about it, is meaningless in looking at the results. So assure when you're actually recording your uncertainties on reports, that is no more than 2 significant digits. Our other policy, PL4 for scopes of accreditation, offers additional guidance. And we also have as one of our calculators, PL4 goes into detail concerning the rules of rounding. We do have a calculator. I find myself using it when I'm not real sure which way to round according to those specified rules of rounding that can be utilized. So also under PL3, there is a requirement, as I mentioned before, if I'm doing an assessment and you have equipment that's been changed or the facility moves, hey, this is going to reflect the actual calibration and measurement capabilities. So your uncertainty budgets will need to be periodically reviewed to reflect any changes. Typically, if everything stays the same equipment that's being utilized, of course, when you send that equipment out for recalibration, you would evaluate that uncertainty, which is, I would call that the first step of your building to the traceability of uncertainty. See if there's any changes in that. If you change suppliers, perhaps you're getting a different calibration supplier, getting a different uncertainty associated with your calibration. So each time you send your instrument out, you need to assure that the uncertainty, if it has changed, that you update your uncertainty budgets. Of course, if you change equipment completely, get new equipment, then this is going to prompt a need to reevaluate uncertainty budgets. And this is a source of a nonconformance, especially if you go in, do an assessment, and you see different equipments that now being utilized and the uncertainty budgets had not been updated to reflect the new equipment. Okay, moving on to number 8 is metrological traceability, section 6.5 and 17025. So metrological traceability. So this also correlates to requirements in our PL2, which is our policy on traceability. So your traceability should be, this is your calibration again, should be by a competent provider. A note in the standard basically states a laboratory fulfilling requirements of this documents are considered to be competent. So in order to assure traceability, if your organization is that your supplier, if they are 17025 accredited, they're accredited to do the particular calibration, that's a slam dunk. They wouldn't be accredited if they weren't providing traceable results. So assure your vendors if they are accredited. If they're not accredited, they can still be providing traceable results. There's just some extra hoops they have to jump through. This is all defined in our PL2. Also, there's an annex, and you'll see that this in a little bit within 17025 that sort of goes into additional detail beyond 17025 accreditation. Reference material. So you're testing folks that are using reference material, same would apply to that. As far as traceability, reference material producer that is accredited to 17034, they are considered competent. We do consider them as a traceable source. Again, Annex A in the back of the standards is informative. It very closely correlates to the requirements that we have in PL2. If you're complying with PL2, our policies on traceability, you're going to be going to be complying with 17025 requirements in Section 6.5 for metrological traceability. So, and in PL2, and also the annex in back of the standard, it goes into some other detail. So if you're not using an accredited source, just speaking on behalf of Perry Johnson Laboratory Accreditation, we do have a protocol in place. It would have to be submitted. I review them all for calibration. There's a form, it's referred to as an LF-123, that would need to be filled out. That, along with specific objective evidence, would need to be submitted and would need to be evaluated in order to get pre-approved, get approved as a traceable sources if you utilize an organization that's not accredited. If they are accredited, then there's no additional hoops that have to be jumped through in order to utilize them as a traceable source. Number 7, and actually this is the actual section in 17025. So we mentioned earlier PL3, measurement uncertainty being a source. You have a lot of crossover here. One of the crossover elements here, assessors just wrote findings against 761, which basically you can see what the requirements there. You have to identify the contributors to measurement uncertainty that are significant. So hence, if you look at that requirement, and if you think back to what we presented when we were looking at PL3, it sounds like we're referring to an uncertainty budgets there. Testing. So mention uncertainty quite often with calibration. It's a requirement as far as reporting. You're looking for that traceability with calibration. Yes, by definition, it needs to have an associated uncertainty. There's a requirement posted here regarding testing. So the big thing with testing, and I've been on some support for a testing assessments, is something a testing lab cannot just simply ignore. You see a couple notes there, they come right out of the standard. So you need to be, when you're looking at this section, this clause, what bucket does your lab fall into? I have a couple notes there. Is it already recognized by a well-recognized test method that already specifies limits to the value of the sources of uncertainty, and you're following that? You also see a note there, note number 2, that also gives guidance there. So for you testing folks there, it's an area that you just can't ignore. You have to address. Often with testing lab, a lot of the uncertainty calculations are based on repeatability. So section 8.3, we're down to number 6, counting down, getting closer to number 1. Assessors have written nonconformances in the area of document control. So the way I like to explain document as opposed to the next section, records, a document is anything that tells you how to do something. So of course your internal procedures, quality manual, quality policies. It's also external, you'll see there, things you bring from the outside world in. A form, a blank form is a document. Once the pen hits the paper, it's a record. So A3 tells you how to do something. Section 8.4 is records that shows you what's been done. So there's a note that specifies exactly what we're referring to with documents, software. So when the standard was revised in 2017, we now have section 711, control of data and information management. So that is now covered under there, but that is also needs to be controlled, and if they change revisions, have to assure everyone's operating off the latest and the greatest. So looking at the requirements, this is all documents need to be controlled, both internal and external, that relates to the fulfillment of this document. So of course, internal is things that you write yourselves internally, quality procedures manual, for example. External is items that you bring from the outside world. It could be procedural. Perhaps it's an ASTM method or an ISO method that you've employed, so they're subjected to being revised. So they would need to be controlled. Those folks that's been accredited prior to the standard being revised, the previous version of 17025 used to require a master list. Standard now gives you a lot of flexibility. I still see, however, in order to assure that an organization is complying with 831, still see a master list being utilized. So if you're using a master list, assure that you can, if you are continuing to use a master list, assure that it also covers external. I've seen a lot of nonconformances written for organizations not including the external documents in their master list. External would also be those folks that are accredited with PJLA, our policies, PL 1, 2, 3, PL 4, SOP 3 for symbol and accreditation language. They should be controlled. They are updated. Actually, we just updated a few here at the end of 2023. So assure that you have the, if you're using a master list, that you update it appropriately. I keep referring to a master list. You're not required to. However, if you're specifying the usage of one, then it needs to be maintained. So 832, documents, they should be periodically reviewed and updated as needed. Your internal document, yes, it should be reflective of what you are actually doing. So if you change the way you're complying with a standard, a clause within the standard, it should be reflective in your quality management system. I got an example here. I've seen this before when I'm doing a pre-assessment review. Going back, see, most of the time folks are using a server, things are automatically backed up. So you still have to be able to protect your records and documents. So still see something written using an external hard drive, and I sort of have to question that. Used to see it. Used to work for an organization. We used to back them up on certain days and put it in a fireproof safe. God forbid if lightning would strike it, the building and burn it down. So it should be reflective of what you're saying. Excuse me, of what you're actually doing. And your external documents should be the latest. So I mentioned a management review here. So when do you do this? If at any time during the year, during the management review, it's a great time to go back, look at your internal documents. Make sure you have the latest external documents, because that's one of the inputs of the management review. Suitability of policies and procedures. Go back and review it, see if you're up to date and current on your internal documents, and also assure that the external documents, they have been updated, that you have the latest. I have a picture there of a current copy of one that was revised in 2020 for analytical type balances that I know hadn't been revised since 1988. So I know some nonconformances were written. Assessor goes in there and this goes back a couple of years now, or hopefully folks are all in the using the current version of this document, but found when this document was revised that some folks were unaware of it and were still operating off the previous version. All right, number 5, SOP 3. So what are we referring to here? very important. This is the use of accreditation symbols and references to accreditation. Again, this is an external document to organizations accredited with Perry Johnson Laboratory Accreditation. This is something that our assessors have been instructed to assess. So we have SOP3, which is in harmony with those requirements specified in 17011, which requires an organization to have a procedure in place, an accrediting body to have a procedure in place for a symbol and accreditation language. And then the ILAC P document, the policy document, which is P8 in this occasion, in this circumstances, for accreditation language and references to accreditation. When they assess us, ILAC, I can share with you folks, last time they assessed us, they sampled some organizations' websites and they found some problem areas. And we had to take corrective action ourselves at PJLA to assure that our labs were being in compliant with the requirements in SOP3. So it's something we take very seriously. It's voluntary. You're not required to use our symbol or reference accreditation on your report or your website. However, if you do, it needs to follow the requirements in SOP3. And I mentioned it also covers, the symbol, and you'll see it also covers usage of the ILAC MRA mark. And it's something that we take very seriously. We will write nonconformances through the PJLA corrective action process. So what are some of the areas that may have prompted nonconformances here? Well, symbols or references to accreditation, they shall only be associated with services covered in the scope of accreditation and not with any other activities in which the organization may be involved. So if you're a calibrator and if this is your scope presenting, if you just do, let's say this organization just do pipettes, and they also do perhaps pressure gauges, throwing that out, but it's not under their scope of accreditation, cannot use the symbol or reference accreditation on the pressure gauge calibration if it's not covered on the scope. Same with the website, so it shouldn't be misleading if non-accredited activities are also on your organization's website. The symbol, how does it need to be displayed? So this is graphics right out of SOP3. The symbol needs to be clear. It needs to have our accrediting body name, PJLA. It needs to specify your area of accreditation. For 17025, it's either calibration, testing, or sampling. Maybe you're also, if you're a 17020 inspection body, then it would of course relate to inspection. Something that also needs to accompany the symbol is your unique accreditation number. So the symbol has to also, in conjunction with displaying it, have your unique accreditation number. Don't get the accreditation number confused with the certificate number. You have two numbers. Your accreditation number will always stay the same. The certificate number will never change. The requirement is the accreditation number needs to be displayed along with the symbol. So we mentioned symbol, it's also references to accreditation. So if you are not using the symbol, but you want to reference your accreditation, SOP3 specifies that. And it pretty much, basically everything without the symbol there. So if you're referencing your accreditation to PJLA, it has to basically state the standard PJLA and accreditation number there, along with your field, calibration, testing, medical reference, whatever the case may be. just referencing accreditation in general. Say you want to state, hey, you're accredited to 1702517. Currently, you have to reference the whole shooting match. So if it's 17025, if you're referencing accreditation on reports on your website, it's ISO IEC 17025 2017. Currently, you have to put the year of the current standard in with your reference to accreditation. There's also some examples there of unacceptable references. One down there at the very bottom, I see written nonconformances and had them corrected, where I seen ISO 17025 referred to as registration or certification. That is incorrect. When you reference 17025, it's specific to accreditation. Registration or certification is associated with other standards. Most prevalent would be ISO 9001 registered or certified. Excuse me, the ILAC mark. So SOP 3 also goes into the ILAC mark. So when our assessors go out to do assessments, they are made aware, as per their assignment, if an organization is approved to use the ILAC mark in conjunction with the PJLA symbol. You are perfectly welcome to use the ILAC mark. That's much more internationally recognized. If I see an accrediting body that I've not heard of before, say overseas in the Middle East or another part of the world, and I see that ILAC mark next to it, that's telling me that this organization is under the ILAC MRA. It's not something that you can just start using. You have to, and this comes right out of SOP 3, in order to get approved, you have to sign an agreement, and you also have to submit a draft to PJLA headquarters to review a draft on how you intend to use a sample on how you're going to utilize the ILAC symbol. It can only be used in conjunction with, ILAC mark in conjunction with the PJLA symbol. That would be reviewed. And then once if it's been approved, you would get a confirmation email. And then when the assessor goes to do your lab, their assignment should show that you've been approved. And if they see the ILAC mark, then it's perfectly fine. It's only an issue is if you have not been approved, then it's using the ILAC mark. All right, moving on, we're getting down to number 4. Again, this is one of our policies, proficiency testing, PL1. Again, correlates to ILAC policies. So proficiency testing, probably the biggest, maybe the biggest source of nonconformance is not getting it done. So prior to accreditation, you have to at least complete one proficiency testing. And then once you're accredited, you're required to perform proficiency testing annually. So it may very well have been a source of a lot of the nonconformancies there. I have a reference here to 773, sort of goes in conjunction from here. So even if you are doing proficiency testing, let's say you're doing interlab, you have to analyze the results. And yes, you're doing proficiency testing. If they're outside of predefined criteria, say you didn't do too well on the proficiency test, or the questionable results that showed you were not in agreement with the other organization or organizations, then be looking to take corrective action. So even if you did your annual proficiency testing, yes, they have to be successful. If they weren't, if they're questionable, or you received let's say an e-normal analysis shows it outside of predefined limits of acceptance, hey, you need to take corrective action. It needs to be investigated. So also with proficiency tests, yes, it has to be done according to an approved method. So PL1 goes into third-party proficiency testing provider, perfectly acceptable. That either accredited, there is a 17043 standard for accredited proficiency testing, or perhaps it's not a, could be a proficiency testing that isn't accredited that's already been approved by PJLA. An interlab comparison, yourself and another competent organization testing the same sample or similar or artifact and comparing your results in a meaningful way. That's all perfectly fine as far as a scheme. I think sometimes where we had issues here is there's also specifies intra-lab and repeatability studies. So this can still be done. However, it needs PJLA approval in order to do an intra-lab comparison. So these are areas, let's say if you're a calibrator and you're doing dimensional calibration and you want to do an intra-lab on a, bear with me 1 minute. Sorry about that. Somebody call me on Microsoft Teams there. Okay, let's go through the caliper example. There's plenty of third-party providers out there, and there's really no reason why an organization should not be able to do a third-party or an interlab comparison. So again, that needs to be approved. An organization needs to state why interlab or third party is not feasible, and then how the intra-lab or repeatability study would be completed and analyzed in a meaningful way. And this document should be submitted to PJLA headquarters. So nonconformances may have been written for organizations doing intra-lab comparisons without prior PJLA performances. Also, we're closely correlate to the requirement right there in 17025 that states where available and appropriate, an organization has to monitor its performance by comparison with results from other laboratories. So in other words, outside your confines of your organization. And we have there where appropriate. So if it's not appropriate, then you have to state your case, and that's addressed in PL1. Oops, going backwards there. All right, getting down here to number 3, which is reporting the results. So this is the final product. You have a personnel in place, you have the facility in place, you have your traceable standards, use an appropriate method, and these are the actual results that you provide your clients under your scope of accreditation. So this section is broken down into various areas. We have common requirements, we have specific to test, specific to calibrations, sampling, and we go over reporting of statements of conformity, talk about opinions, interpretations, and amendments. So just going to look at some of these requirements that may have presented some issues for nonconformances. So 7821, I really condensed things here. These are for all areas, testing, calibration, and sampling. And I highlighted a couple of them here, and this is my personal take on it. So all these items you see here are required, and I circled unless the laboratory has a valid reason for not doing so. And I would say if you want to look through there, if you're doing your internal audit, this is an area, and what an assessor does is just basically they'll sample reports and assure that all these elements are getting captured on your accredited report. I circled a couple, identified a couple here that I feel personally I've written nonconformances against, and I find still being missed is 7821J, the date of issue of the report. So 2 dates are required on there, the date of test or calibration, also the date of issue. So that's the date that it's been reviewed and it actually gets issued to the customer. So even if it's the same date of the date of test or calibration, that needs to be captured. And then the person authorizing the report. So under 6.2, under authorization, you have to authorize individuals to issue reports to the customer. So even if it happens for smaller organizations, if it's the same person that's wearing two hats in this scenario where they're actually doing the test or calibration, they are doing the report. Ideally, yes, they're reviewing that report before it's issued. Need to capture that separate date of issue, and also they also have to be identified as the person also authorizing the release of the report. Test report. So 7831 is specific to testing where necessary for the interpretation. So for your test folks, if there's any specific conditions such as temperature and humidity that is needed. If a statement of conformity with the requirements or specifications, so i.e. if you're required to have a pass-fail statement on there. Uncertainty, and it says where applicable. So we talked about actually uncertainty before. One of the biggest differences between calibration and testing is reporting. You'll see here in a little bit, calibration, you shall report uncertainty. Testing, maybe, maybe not, but it needs to be reported if it is relevant to the validity of the application of the test results. Customer instructions require it, or it affects that statement of conformity, that pass-fail statement. Now, 7.8 is specific to calibration. So we have shall there. So that's a requirement. So measurement uncertainty, that is a requirement. It has to be reported. It shall be reported. It's no longer back in 2005, prior to the revision, used to say and or uncertainty and or a statement of compliance. That and or has went away. You shall report uncertainties. Also, the environmentals under which calibrations were made, that has an influence on the measurement effect. So that would be, of course, temperature, humidity, are usually the things that I would see captured there. Statements of conformity. So this is an area, and this is when you're making a pass-fail statement, and this is related to uncertainty. You see at the bottom there, there's the definition of a decision rule. So 7861 revolves around recording the decision rule. So this is how measurement uncertainty is taken into account when you have a statement of compliance. So if you're stating pass, fail, intolerance, out of tolerance, you're making a statement of compliance, and this clause is applicable. If you are not making a statement of compliance, you're giving your organization the analysis, the results. You're not making a statement of compliance, and then this clause is not applicable. It's just when you make that statement of compliance, you have to also record on the report your decision rule. In other words, how measurement uncertainty was taken into account. And I don't believe this made the top 10 list. It did not. Under review request tenders and contract, there is also a requirement that the organization has to agree to your decision rule. So that should be made upfront to your customers as per 713 clause about a customer has to agree to the decision rule. But here is under reporting that it also the decision rule needs to be specified on the report. All right, under getting down there, two more here. Number 10, excuse me, number 2 is equipment. So basically, you see the requirement there. You have to basically, in a nutshell, you have to have the correct tools to do the job. You have to have appropriate equipment that is required for the correct performance of laboratory activities that can influence the results. Before you either need to verify or calibrate equipment. You shall verify equipment that, before putting it into service to verify that it conforms to specified requirements. The equipment used for measurement shall be capable of achieving the measurement accuracy and or uncertainty required to provide a valid result. So if you have a temperature device and it needs to be calibrated, say within a tenth of a degree, a standard oven type thermometer would not be an appropriate piece of equipment. Calibrated. So it sort of correlates, I think, to the section on traceability. You have to have the equipment calibrated where the measurement accuracy or the measurement uncertainty affects the validity of the reported results. And if measurement traceability is needed, excuse me. Intermediate checks. So when intermediate checks are necessary to maintain confidence in the performance of the equipment, these checks shall be carried out according to a procedure. With you folks that are doing testing, often see things like spikes and blanks and things like that worked into the testing protocol, where if the equipment was to drift, ideally perhaps a control chart would capture it. Checking a balance with a calibrated test weight would be another intermediate check, particularly if you're a calibrator and you're doing on-site calibrations. When you're taking up equipment, you're picking it up, you're moving it, taking it to the customer site. Really need to have an intermediate check when you set up and assure that the equipment is operating within predefined limits of acceptance. All right, we've made it all the way to the number one area where assessors at PJLA wrote the most nonconformances at during 2023, which is section 7.2, which is a selection, verification, and validation of methods. So, of course, 7.2.1.1, yes, you have to use appropriate methods for all laboratory activities and where appropriate for the evaluation of measurement uncertainties. As well as statistical techniques for the analyzing of the data. It sort of goes hand in hand with, I would say, document control, that you shall assure you're using the latest version of the method. So unless it has, it's not appropriate or possible to do so, when necessary, the application of the method shall be supplemented with additional detail to ensure consistent application. So you may adopt it, a nationally recognized method, but you can supplement it with an internal method that may be better for your technicians to use, easier to follow, as long as it's complying with the latest version of the national or internationally recognized method. Again, I think this is the third time I mentioned this during the management review 892. Suitability of policies and procedure. A good time to go back and assure that you're using the latest and the greatest method. This is your actual calibration or testing method. Verification. So before you, the laboratory shall verify you can properly perform the method before introducing them by ensuring that it can achieve the required performance, and records need to be maintained. So with accreditation, if scope expansions, if you're doing a say a calibration in various areas and you want to expand your scope, and you put in a scope expansion for PJLA and it's going to be assessed, we want to see records that, hey, you're just not adding it, that you actually verified that you can achieve the attended results. Let's say you wanted to start doing, I would throw pressure in there again, something you want to expand to. You want to look for some sort of records of verification. Can include, of course, hey, proficiency testing with other labs, even some sort of intra-labs with repeatability checks and EN analysis, or perhaps a comparison to a known reference value. as ways to verify. Validation. So these are you're going to write your own procedure, or a non-standard method used, or using a standard method used outside their intended scope, or otherwise you're going to modify it. You have to maintain copies of the validation, and there's under 7224. These are the records that need to be maintained. Validation procedure, the specification requirements, the determination of the performance characteristics of the methods, results obtained, and a statement of validity. So when all the dust settles, basically need to determine whether or not the method is has been determined to be validated or not. All righty, we've gone down the list here. So thank you everyone for joining, and bear with me a moment. Let me see if I can get to see if we have any questions here. Looks like I have a few here, and I'll try to go through these. Uncertainty budgets. Somebody's asking, does it apply to testing labs? As far no, it's a calibration, so it's specific for calibration in PL3. Calibration labs needs to prepare the compare to the I'm reading ahead of myself here. The question is, what is the uncertainty budget? Does it apply to testing laboratories? And well, we had some samples of uncertainty budgets here. It applies to calibration labs. It's where you basically identify the sources of uncertainty. You have to analyze them. So basically, with every uncertainty budget, there's three things I typically would see in there, and then from there it just depends on the calibration. So you always have the uncertainty associated with your reference standard. You always have uncertainty associated with repeatability, and you always have uncertainty associated with the resolution of the device under test. Well, this next one here, it's somebody's asking, what if you have an issue with a lab that is accredited and then two questionable calibrations? Well, the first thing I would do would be address that lab itself. If you are accredited, you have a protocol for complaints. And if you, I would say that would be your first line that you would go to, would be to the accredited. Basically, you have some evidence, as far as why the results are being questioned. So I would say you always go to the accredited organization first. And at PJLA, yes, and I do get them once in a while for accrediting bodies. We're required to have a protocol in place for complaints as well. And if you feel for whatever reason that the accredited, and I'm speaking on behalf of PJLA, I have no idea if this is even a real life situation here, if this is one of our accredited labs. If you're able to rectify the situation to the lab, then you can address it through the accrediting body, and we make the determination of whether or not it falls within our wheelhouse. If it does, then we would address the lab, and if a corrective action is needed, we would expect to see that taken. For control of document review, how often is a good practice to review them? Excuse me. Well, of course, as things change, you want to make sure if anything gets revised, that you assure everybody has the latest and the greatest. And this is my personal opinion. I brought it up a couple times during the assessment, during the webinar, that during the management review, the suitability of policies and procedure, if no other time during the year, that's a good time to go back, look at it, and determine whether or not items need to be updated, particularly your own internal documents. It should be reflective of how you're doing things. I'm a key proponent of the KISS principle, if you know what that is. If you get into too much detail, if you have too many shalls, there are requirements you're putting on yourself during the management review, prior to the management review, perhaps when you get to that suitability of policies and procedures, that would be a good time to provide input for that. For interlaboratory PTs, do you have requirements, explanation on how this is done? Yes, go to our website under PJLA policies, go into PL, excuse me, PL 1. We have a whole section on interlaboratory comparison, what it is. So in a nutshell, yes, it's your organization and another organization comparing the same artifact or similar sample, and you're comparing your results in a meaningful way. Ideally, the other organization is accredited, and that used to be required last time we revised PL1. We changed that accredited to competent. So if they're not accredited, they need to be competent. However, your organization needs to maintain a record on what you're hanging your hat on as far as specifying the other organization is competent. If they are accredited, then that would be enough. And then you have to do it in a meaningful way. So we go over in PL1 things like e-normal analysis, Z-test. We have that calculator on our website for analyzing proficiency tests using the e-normal analysis. So PL1, I would review that if you want some more detail on that. Bear with me, I'm trying to get the gist of this next question. Okay, in regards to the authorization of the personnel reviewing the calibration report with a document, appointed personnel is enough. The lab, I mean, it's up to the lab, your organization. You have to capture that organization. That's not organization, authorization, and that's specified in 6.2. So you should have a record of individuals that are authorized to release tests. And then I'm really not real clear on the second part. For labs develop an LTD test with no PT available, is prior approval required to do intralab precision? Yes, it is. So again, if you want to pursue intralab or repeatability studies, you would contact PJLA headquarters. This would actually, and as stated earlier, you need to state your case. You need to state why interlab or third party is not feasible, and then also how you plan to conduct the intra-lab proficiency test and analyze the data in a meaningful way. Again, this is all spelled out in PL1, so yep, you would have to gain that approval, and that would go before, I'm not real sure, an LDT test, that sounds like a testing, would go before the testing program manager to approve. Verification of the method can be assessed through proficiency testing. Absolutely, yes. How can I get the recorded webinar? Go to our website. Under resources, I believe is the webinar tab. There is a tab that says recorded webinars. You can go back and re-listen to this webinar, and we have a vast history of past webinars. This next one here, yes, if you hang on here, my next slide will answer your question. First-time QC managers here. Any course you provide that I should look into? Whoop. Well, let me just sort of get ahead of the game here. Right there. And if you can see that, we are actually offering, and this is all on our website, we're offering overview courses, and this is going to be done virtually through our technical program manager, Matt Seeke. We have a couple of them scheduled right now. It's a 2-day course. It's great for anyone who is overseeing the 17025 compliant quality management system, and it's also anyone who's doing the internal audit. So that was actually my next slide here. So hopefully this is something that you can use. Can I have more detail on the accreditation complaint process? Under our website, under resources, PJLA documents, you have individual SOPs. I believe that's one of the SOPs there. If not, feel free to call our headquarters. We can send you the SOP that we have that. I'm assuming that this is complaining against another accredited CAB, or excuse me, an accredited organization. We're finding significant difficulties in finding PTs for some testing calibration. Can we organize an interlaboratory comparison with other labs? Should they be accredited for the particular test or calibration? Yes, that's basically what an interlab comparison is, as specified in PL number 1. Yourself and at least one other organization. Do they need to be accredited? Ideally, yes, but it's no longer required. They have to be competent, and you need to make the assessor will be looking for records. So you have to maintain some sort of record showing that the other organization is competent. Of course, if they were accredited, a copy of their scope of accreditation would be sufficient. All righty, I think I reached the end there. So thank you very much. Again, everyone, on our website there, I have it up on the slide now. So virtual courses that we're going to be offering. Feel free to visit our website for future webinars. And also we have workshops coming up. So we have a lot of information there. Appreciate everyone joining me this afternoon. First webinar of 2024, and I certainly hope everybody has a great new year. Thank you very much.